Back from lunch. Did the 49ers offense pre-cut down day before lunch. Now we get to do the 49ers defense. So thanks again for joining. Hope that everybody else was able to eat some good food. I had some spaghetti, so that was nice. And now we can get right into talking about we'll call it the stomach of this 49ers team. Speaking of food, that defensive line. I mean, that's the stomach, the heartbeat. I mean, this is where it's centered at for the 49ers. This defensive line is deep. This defensive line is kind of the fulcrum of everything else that happens for the 49ers. It was that way in 2019. It was supposed to be that way in 2020, but then the team saw a ton of injuries, and I think the 49ers are very confident that this will be the case again in 2021. So you look at the way that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have built this 49ers team, and they have started from the inside out. They've wanted to get that defensive line as strong as possible. Now, on the offensive side of the football, obviously the front has had ups and downs, but on the defensive side of the ball, especially after the 49ers got roaring, the front has had very few downs. I mean, in 2019, when this team was healthy that year, I think it was unquestionably the best defensive line in the entire NFL. And in 2021, whenever you go out to a 49ers practice, it's that corner of the field where Chris Kasarik is working with his entire army of defensive linemen, where you feel all the energy coming from, and then you've seen it translate into these games. So it's so important to pay attention to what's going on at practice and training camp, because it is going to translate to the playing field. And it certainly has for the 49ers here so far in the preseason in 2021. That defensive line continues to do work for the 49ers. I am going to share my screen so that way we can take a look at just how deep the 49ers are at that position. And we're going to talk about a couple of the roster permutations that probably are going to have to happen come cut down day, less than 24 hours from now. That's when that deadline is for the 49ers to make all the cuts to get down to 53. So here we go. We're looking at defense this time. So we'll zoom in on that part of what's going on. Starting with that defensive line, I have the 49ers carrying 10. So here are the 10 chosen defensive linemen in my book. Obviously Bosa, obviously Armstead, obviously DJ Jones, obviously Samson Ebukam, Javon Kinlaw lock, D Ford, who's been healthy, who's been working his way back into the mix as a lock. Zach Kerr was one of the more underrated defensive tackles in all of football last year. He's going to be on the inside. And I think that Arden Key obviously makes it as well. The last two that I have for the 49ers are Kevin Givens and Kentavious Street. Now, who's not in? Well, technically, I think he will be in. Maurice Hurst. I think he's going to make that 53-man roster. But Maurice Hurst is hurt right now. He has a high ankle sprain. So that means that the 49ers are going to have to get creative. In the case of Maurice Hurst, you have a player who is a veteran, who I think would get scooped up off of waivers if the 49ers waived him with an injury designation with that high ankle sprain. So what do you do if you're the 49ers? Well, to make sure that Maurice Hurst is able to return this season, which the 49ers certainly want, you have to waive him with you don't waive him at all. You have to make sure that he gets onto the 53-man roster. That means that you can put him on injured reserve right away the very next day. That means that Maurice Hurst will be eligible to come back this season. Only 3 weeks. IR, that short-term window that they started in 2020, is once again available here in 2021. So you get Maurice Hurst on that initial 53-man roster. If you look to see how that works, that means the 49ers will have to carry 11 defensive linemen. But you immediately are able to put them on IR, reopen a roster spot. So that means that you take another veteran, one who is not eligible to be exposed to waivers, and you tell him, hey, we need to make room for Maurice. We're going to release you, but we have a contract ready for you to sign in a day. You can come back. That's what I call a wink-wink deal. Well, I think the 49ers are going to do that. Might they do it with one of the other defensive linemen? Maybe. Zach Kerr is somebody who might be eligible. They also might do it with a veteran somewhere else they plan to carry. Maybe Tavon Wilson. I'll get down to the safety position here in a little bit. We're just not sure exactly who's going to make it, but you can't go with a high-profile guy because you would never risk releasing a high-profile guy just to sign him the next day. Too much funny business can happen that way. So you go with a lower-profile player who's willing to do this wink-wink sacrifice, and he comes back in. But because of the entire permutation, I do think the 49ers initially carry 11 defensive linemen because Maurice Hurst, who I've highlighted here in pink, headed to an injury list, is too valuable to give up. As the season progresses, the 49ers will certainly be happy that they retain some of their depth on an injury list that is eligible for a return to play. Just look back at the 2019 season. The 49ers were absolutely loaded along the defensive line. To start that year, they were absolutely loaded, in week 7, week 8? But once you got to week 11, 12 especially, 12 to 17, stuff got leaky there. Injuries started happening. The best example I could think of is the Seattle game in week 17 of that 2019 season. The 49ers had to sign guys off the street just to be able to play in that game. So Anthony Zettel, who recently retired during this training camp, former Chris Kasarik guy who's a veteran, they brought him in off the street to play against Seattle in week 17. He did a fine job, but just look at how that game flowed. The 49ers defensive line under Chris Kasarik plays 120 miles an hour. I mean, that is the kind of effort that he wants, roaring around the edges. There aren't complicated reads. It's put your hand down in the dirt and get your ass after the quarterback. That's the defense that the 49ers play up front in their wide 9 scheme. Because they do not play with a governor, they need to come in waves. That's why I'm going to make this depth chart bigger right now. This right here, what you see, these are waves of talent. You have the first wave, you have a second wave, and I know they're going to mix and match it differently. You'll see Kinlaw in there too. And then they have even a third wave. So you have 10 guys coming after the quarterback with impressive depth out here to eventually join the team at some point later. Even Eddie Yarborough against the Raiders and throughout all preseason was extremely impressive. Nice sack yesterday. Alex Barrett and Eddie Yarborough, in fact, even though I don't have them projected to make the team, were the 49ers' 2 best, highest graded defensive linemen during the preseason. So you could see right here that the 49ers have this philosophy of coming in waves so they can execute Chris Kasarik's vision of running 120 miles an hour without getting too fatigued. You go back to that Seattle game in 2019, the 49ers went out gangbusters in that first half. They shut out Seattle and Russell Wilson in the first half on the road in Seattle because they were going 120 miles an hour up front. They were overwhelming the Seahawks. The problem is because they had lost a lot of that depth by that point. I mean, they didn't have D Ford. They didn't have Ronald Blair. They didn't have several other guys. It was at the point where they had to pick up Anthony Zettel off the street. They ran out of gas in the second half. It's no coincidence that Seattle started scoring on every single drive in the second half. It's no coincidence that it's extremely important in those situations for Kyle Shanahan to be able to run the football on offense so he doesn't expose his defense too much. This is what complementary football is all about. You need to control the football on offense to let the ears pin back on that defensive line. Let those guys get after the quarterback and let them go with their pedal to the metal. Because Chris Kasarik's defensive line is one that has to go with its pedal to the metal. There is no 80%. There is no energy conservation at 70%. This is a 120% defensive line, so you need as much depth as possible. That's why the 49ers are very unlikely, despite rumors to the contrary, to trade anyone off of this defensive line. People do not think about this in logical terms. They think, oh, the 49ers, they have a good defensive line. That must be a position where they can get some trade, capital in return for that. No, that's not the case. The way that this position works for the 49ers is that they need all of those bodies. 4 is not enough. 6 is not enough. 7 is not enough. 8 is not enough. They need those 10 bodies, and that's why you're going to see them carry 10 on that unit come cut down day on Tuesday. And they barely have enough to make the 10 really, really work right now. Unless, here's the one asterisk, unless they think that Alex Barrett and Eddie Yarborough, these two guys right here, are ready for the lights to come on, full-time duty in the regular season. I still tend to think that because attrition is a thing, the 49ers are going to want to stash these two guys in the practice squad instead. You have your 10 proven guys right here, the 10 guys who are definitely going to make the roster. You had 12 at a certain point, but look, Maurice Hurst is hurt. Jordan Willis is suspended for the first 6 games. So you treat those two, Hurst and Willis, as potential reinforcements who can come in during week 6 or week 7 for Jordan Willis, maybe week 8 or week 9 for Maurice Hurst. And guess what? Because of the nature of this sport, guys are going to get hurt. Guys are going to get dinged up. You'll be very happy to have Jordan Willis and Maurice Hurst come in then. Now, Jordan Willis is not happy that he got suspended because that means that he doesn't get game checks for the first 6 weeks. But the 49ers, in a way, they can see this as a blessing in disguise because they will have that reinforcement at a time when the roster can handle him, can absorb him, rather than right now when they would have to actually cut or trade one of those guys. But as it stands, this moment, the 49ers can carry the 10 defensive linemen who are very deserving of that roster spot. Now, is Alex Verret deserving of a roster spot after a massive preseason? Is Eddie Yarborough deserving of a roster spot after this massive preseason? We'll see. That's something that the market will determine. If the 49ers waive Verret and or Yarborough, the NFL will have a chance to scoop either of those two guys up off the waiver wire. But if that doesn't happen, if they clear waivers, the 49ers can re-sign them to their practice squad, which is something that I wouldn't be surprised to see the 49ers do. That's how good those two guys were during the preseason. I know that they were working against some Raiders reserves yesterday, but boy, they overpowered them. And boy, this defensive line in general overpowered all of its opposition during the course of this preseason. It was impressive to see shades of 2019. That's what the 49ers were saying from day one. The key, guys, is this guy right here, Nick Bosa. I have him highlighted again. Nick Bosa. He needs to stay healthy. He makes everybody better. He's an all-pro. I mean, yes, if you have Bosa and D Ford, then you have 2019 all over again, but you have a good line as long as Nick Bosa's in there because he is such a good, durable force to be in there, down in, down out, that the offense always has to account for him, whether it's a run, whether it's a pass. It's the same kind of domino effect I think the 49ers offensive line expect to see from the combination of Alex Mack and Trent Williams. You just have a star out there in Nick Bosa, and you expect it to make everybody else better. Now, you look at the other players. Eric Armstead is being paid like a star. I think that he can also be a versatile piece that makes a huge impact for the 49ers. That's why they paid him that type of money. DJ Jones, if you talk to anybody on the 49ers staff, they think this guy's unblockable. The problem has been health. So ability is there. Availability is, what has been lacking. And Samson Ebukam, here's a guy whose availability was there for the Rams for 4 years, but the ability did not have a chance to be on firm display because they used him in this outside linebacker role as a 3-4 defense under Wade Phillips and then Brandon Staley this past year. It's just a situation where Ebukam is a get your hand in the dirt, speed edge rusher, same measurables as D Ford. 49ers are going to play him in that role. In fact, I have Ebukam ahead of D Ford on the depth chart right now just because we're waiting to see what exactly D Ford will give the 49ers. But consider where we are now compared to where we were just a month ago, 2 months, even 3 months ago. The D Ford thing, we talked about that as icing on the cake. Found money for the 49ers. Well, it looks like they picked up that $20 bill that they found on the sidewalk or on the pavement in the parking lot, and they're about to pocket it. It looks like D Ford is going to be ready to go for week 1. He's looked solid in practice. He's beating McGlinchey with his hands in practice and his strength, not just his speed. The back has responded well, and I think that you're going to have a week 1 that's reminiscent of 2019 season opener when the 49ers were at Tampa Bay, and you saw Bosa roar around the edge, you saw D Ford roar around the edge, and that very first rep of that game in 2019 at Tampa Bay, Jameis Winston was the quarterback. It was the year before Tom Brady came into Tampa. Boy, you knew that something was different about the 49ers defensive line. Now, they did have DeForest Buckner back then, which makes this guy, Javon Kinlaw, so important. He has to have a year. He has to take a stride. He has to stay healthy. Because Buckner made a lot of that 2019 defensive line tick. Now, I don't think that he was the absolute glue. I think the edge rushers were the guys that changed stuff in 2019. The 49ers defensive line struggled even with DeForest Buckner before Bosa and Ford arrived. So it's the edge rushers that make the real impact in today's NFL. But you do still need those interior guys to deliver. That's why the 49ers missed DJ Jones so much after he went down in week 14 of 2019. That's why they spent the first-round pick on Javon Kinlaw to replace DeForest Buckner. It always made sense, that DeForest Buckner trade, for that to go down. For cap purposes, I could do a whole show if people keep on complaining about that. I mean, it's so short-sighted to complain about that DeForest Buckner trade and the cap mechanics of it being that defensive tackle position that, you could look at any data. It's not as important as those edge rushing positions. And the 49ers, they would have been flat out of money to do what they did this year. I mean, that would have financially impacted them for years on end. It wasn't a choice between Buckner and Armstead. It was Armstead at a cheaper financial cost, with Buckner bringing you back that first-round pick. I mean, it was basically a 3-for-1 trade, but we'll get into that in a different show. The point is that the 49ers are without Buckner now, but they do have Kinlaw, and Kinlaw needs to show up and be at least 80% of what Buckner was. They don't need him to be 100% of what Buckner was. They need him to be 80% of what Buckner was. He wasn't, as a rookie, to be expected. Year 2, huge for Javon Kinlaw. So let's see what happens, because this defensive line will look mighty appetizing if Kinlaw can step up and be a force on the inside next to DJ Jones. It's going to look mighty appetizing if Nick Bosa and Samson Ebukam and D Ford can roar around the edges with some help from Arden Key. Because what happens then? That means that the interior depth can get to work, and these guys can eat. Contavious Street can eat. Kevin Givens can eat. Eric Armstead can line up on the inside and have a 5-course meal. That's the way that this defensive line for the 49ers is supposed to work. You just absolutely have to nail down the fundamental pieces, the guys with fundamental roles: Bosa, Armstead, DJ Jones, Ebukam, Kinlaw. Those guys have to do their jobs, and then you let this depth work. And this depth has been coached up by Chris Kasarik, and I'm sure the 49ers are happy with it. So that's what has to happen on the defensive line. It's a situation where there is a glut of talent, and the 49ers are quite happy with it, because they need to come in waves, and they'll manage the talent and the glut with sound roster management. And they have a little bit of a break with Willis suspended and Hurst here. They could finagle onto that roster through a wink-wink deal. On to the linebackers. The linebacker position for the 49ers is evolving. It is an entire NFL, and I think the 49ers are trying to be at the forefront of the evolution. 3 seasons ago, 2018, they drafted a hybridized defensive back out of BYU named Fred Warner. He's now the 49ers all-pro star middle linebacker, wears the helmet with a radio in it, and is considered one of the best, if not the best, middle linebackers in the game. For a while there, he was the highest paid middle linebacker in the game. The 49ers rewarded Warner handsomely. The point is that Warner doesn't fall into the old school linebacker stereotype. The guy's 6'4". He's built like a massive, strong safety, maybe like a guy, you remember the Seahawks days, Legion of Boom, Cam Chancellor, strong safety, played in near the box. Well, Fred Warner obviously plays in near the box as a linebacker. He has that safety length, that safety body, and obviously he's got speed to go along with it. So we all know that Fred Warner can cover. That's what he did at BYU. They created a special position for him on that defense. He's kind of manning the slot. It was everything that the 49ers wanted out of a modern linebacker in terms of pass coverage. But we now also know that Fred Warner can stop the run. I mean, that's already been going on for a couple of years, but he can also tackle really well. He no longer tackles like a DB. He tackles like a middle linebacker. We also know that Dre Greenlaw has been able to tackle really well since day one. So now Batman, Warner, and Robin Greenlaw can both tackle. Greenlaw's still working on the coverage, but boy, he's got a flair for the dramatic. We know that he can make stops short of the line to gain. He's done that famously a couple times now, and the 49ers love their 1-2. They hope that Azeez Al-Shaair, who was a tackle machine in college, who has had dealt with some injury issues with them in the pros, but who generally has been on an upward trajectory. They hope that he can be firmly that number 3 guy this year. But even if Al-Shaair is not, this is where things get really interesting for the 49ers. And this is why Marcel Harris, former safety, is listed in green. Marcel Harris nicknamed himself the hardest hitter in the SEC when he was coming out of Florida. The guy was a safety then. He was a safety for his first couple years with the 49ers. he might not have been lying when he called himself the hardest hitting safety in the SEC. I mean, this is a physical guy. The problem is that he was probably playing the wrong position in the NFL for his first couple of years. Because this guy loves being near the box. And I know the strong safety in the scheme loves being near the box. But the 49ers are going to way more interchangeability now, and the safeties are dropping back. And that gets turned into trouble against teams like the Saints, whom Marcel Harris got roasted against in coverage back in 2019. And the 49ers realized they needed to essentially do what they're doing with Trey Lance right now. They needed to maximize the chances for Marcel Harris to make his skill set look really good and minimize his chances of negative exposure. So because he was bad in coverage on the back end, the 49ers, and really good in compressed spaces on the front end, the 49ers made the move from strong safety to linebacker for Marcel Harris. And officially they didn't do it till this offseason, but they really did it last year when Harris got like 60 or 70 snaps at that linebacker position. He now looks like a complete natural at linebacker, to the point where I had to highlight him in green. That means rising stock on my depth chart. And I would be absolutely shocked. I mean, this is one of the closest things to a lock on the 49ers bubble that there is. I'd be absolutely shocked if Harris did not make the 49ers 53-man roster. Beyond the fact that he's flying around to the football, that you love that coverage ability for the flats, for the shorter passes, for the tight ends coming out of the backfield, or for the running backs coming out of the backfield, and the tight ends releasing from play action motion at the line of scrimmage. Besides all that, Marcel Harris is one of the 49ers' best special teams players. So he's going to make this football team. That's spot number 4. And to me, it's just an interesting last battle between Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, who follows the Fred Warner mold. This is I guess a little bit of Marcel Harris too, but this is a college safety, so college DB. Fred Warner definitely had that DB-like role in college. You have and height, right? With Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, you got 6'2", 6'3" height. These are not your old school stocky linebackers, your 5'11s, maybe your 6 feet. These are 6'3", 6'4" guys that are long, that can cover, that can run, right? That the 49ers are developing into good tacklers. So Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is a player that the 49ers believe in because of the length, because of the physical attributes, and how they fit into what they're trying to do defensively. And I think because Flanagan-Fowles has already served some time on the 53-man roster, has already essentially proven himself as an incumbent for a spot because of some good action last year, I really think that he's going to make it. But there are some guys knocking on the door. A couple weeks ago, I had Jonas Griffith highlighted in green because Jonas Griffith has had a good preseason. Also cut from the Fred Warner Flanagan-Fowles physical cloth. Jonas Griffith is 6'4". I mean, how many 6'4" linebackers or 6'3" linebackers can you have? The 49ers are 2 6'4" guys, 1 6'3" guy, and Dre Greenlaw, a player who was one of the fastest on Arkansas's defense. He can run. I mean, you could see what the 49ers are doing here. Length, speed, coverage ability. For Jonas Griffith, who had a pick of Trey Lance in training camp, who was all over the place against the Chiefs in week 1, you've really got to think he's got a chance at this, but I'm still leaning practice squad for Jonas Griffith. I think that the 49ers are still developing in him, still making sure that he has that full middle linebacker command of the game to be able to be a guy that fills in directly behind somebody like Fred Warner. As of right now, if Warner goes down during a game, Greenlaw switches over to that Mike linebacker spot, takes the helmet with a radio in it. I highlighted Justin Hilliard because Hilliard, that guy, coming out of Ohio State, I mean, this is a prized player if he doesn't go through all those injuries that he did in college. But Hilliard looks healthy now. The guy hits hard. The guy can move a bit. The guy's got good size. What's there not to like about Justin Hilliard if he stays healthy? So I think he's a guy that the 49ers will consider bringing back on the practice squad along with Jonas Griffith. And, hey, I have to say, Elijah Sullivan was good too against the Raiders. So all of these players are really knocking on the door, but I think Flanagan-Fowles is the incumbent, and I think that he played really well against the Chargers a week ago, did some stuff on special teams, and unless the incumbent does something to really knock himself out of contention. And I don't think Flanagan Fowles has done anything of that regard. It's going to be hard for the other players to knock on the door. Top 3 set, Marcel Harris probably going to knock on that strong side linebacker spot. He's going to play in special situations. I mean, he definitely is much more of a specialty piece with that safety background. Plus, he can bolster the safety depth. He's in too. I think Flanagan Fowles is your last linebacker on the 53 with the 49ers carrying 5. Defensive backs. We'll finish up with these guys. We got the cornerbacks, we've got the nickelback spot, and we've got the safeties. And this is going to be really interesting to me. At cornerback, at one of the spots, you got Jason Verret. Obviously, Jason Verret is a football player who needs to stay healthy. He missed a couple days here this last week, but it was minor. And the 49ers are in a position where they really want Jason Verret. One second here, guys. You guys go back over there. Can you tell my dad to get her to go downstairs? Oh my God. 1 second, guys.
He's asleep. Come here.
All right, guys, we're back. We're going to finish up here with the 49ers defensive backs. Had to take care of something. I'm watching my grandma here at the cabin, so that's taken care of. And now we're ready to talk the secondary for the 49ers. Jason Verret is your centerpiece. He's your cornerback 1. You need Jason Verret to be your cornerback 1 because without one in this league, it gets sketchy. There's a lot of good receivers, especially in the NFC West. So 49ers are really counting on Jason Verret to stay healthy this year. You really cringe if he returns back to his injury-riddled ways. And so far, not really any indication of that, but the 49ers need to knock on wood in that scenario. I thought that Emanuel Mosley came into camp looking stronger than last year, looking more competent than last year. I think he's made the natural progression, and I think that's extremely encouraging for the 49ers and almost necessary because entering camp, you know, when you look at this depth chart, there was a lot of pressure, especially if Mosley hadn't made the strides that it seems that he's made. There's a lot of pressure on one of these 2 rookies, Deommodore Lenoir or Ambry Thomas, to step up right away. And as we've seen, it's good that they don't have to step up right away. Ambry Thomas not ready to start. Physically, he didn't play in 2020. He opted out. Physically, he needs more seasoning. He needs more time in the weight room. You saw that missed tackle against the Raiders on Sunday. It's extremely important that the 49ers give Ambry Thomas breathing room. And to be honest, I don't think Deommodore Lenoir is ready to start either. He's given up some plays. And the 49ers defensive line has been playing really well. So these corners have had the benefit of a good pass rush in front of them. Lenoir is more ready than Thomas at this point, I think, physically. But he's a guy that you're going to move in there on spot duty. You may see some slot action. You still really like Jason Verret and Emanuel Mosley as your top two corners if you're the 49ers. And because of that, when you only have, two veteran guys really running the show, if you're the 49ers, who make you feel comfortable right now while you're developing your rookies behind them for the future, because of that, you might really want to bring veteran depth into the fold so that way you have a higher floor. It's not about the ceiling with a guy like Dante Johnson. And before you spit out your food or your drink or whatever you're consuming right now at lunch, I know that people hate the idea of Dante Johnson making the 49ers 53-man roster, but as the days have gone by, I've really come to terms with the fact that I think it's going to happen. Dante Johnson is not the Dante Johnson of 3 or 4 years ago, but he's been a journeyman around the NFL since then. This is not the old Trent Baalke pick. Yeah, technically it's the same guy, but at this point, Johnson is a vet. He's 30 years old. He's learned the system. He's been around for, so long and so many different systems that that he gives you a high floor as far as knowledge of the playbook and an ability to avoid a Brian Allen-like situation. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. It was the 49ers Dolphins last year. They ran out of cornerback. Ahkello Witherspoon said that he, didn't want to start or wouldn't start, whatever happened. He ultimately came into the game, but it was too little too late. And by that point, the Dolphins had mercilessly picked on Brian Allen, and the 49ers had no chance to come back in that football game. You need somebody that will avoid catastrophe in case Emanuel Mosley and Jason Verret go down. To me, that's Dante Johnson. I think that this guy can get the job done for the 49ers in a pinch. He can make stuff acceptable. And I think that's how DeMeco Ryans is going to be thinking. So I do think that either Dante Johnson will make the 53-man roster, or he'll be on that practice squad as one of the 49ers' 6 eligible veterans to be able to be called up in a pinch. But I think there's a lot of value in having Johnson on the 53-man roster in games. Because say that Emanuel Mosley gets hurt, say that Jason Verret gets hurt, say that they both get hurt in one game, that can torpedo the entire football game. Right? Because you saw what DeAndre Hopkins did in week 1 to Emanuel Mosley last year. You've seen, what the Dolphins did when the 49ers didn't have cornerbacks, the 2 of them. You're only as good as your worst starting corner. Well, the 49ers need to make sure they're insulated there. And I think that Dante Johnson doesn't give him a high ceiling, but he's not a ceiling guy. He's a guy that you raise the floor with. The only way that I see the 49ers risking this, rolling the dice, and going into the 2021 season with Lenoir and Ambry Thomas as their immediate backups for Verret and Mosley is if they have so much trust in their pass rush overwhelming people. And this is a rush over coverage team, don't get me wrong. I know the analytics people hate that, but this is a rush over coverage team. The 49ers have so much faith in their defensive line just wrecking people that they think, oh, well, it doesn't really matter who's behind them. We can throw Thomas. We can throw Lenoir out there if we need to. If they believe that, maybe the 49ers save the roster spot and don't take Dante Johnson. Or they do the compromise. Like I said earlier, they put Dante Johnson on the practice squad as one of the 6, and they call him up if they need to. It would cost them potential in-game flexibility, but I just think that the 49ers were traumatized by experiences against DeAndre Hopkins and that experience against Miami last year with Brian Allen, to the point where I think this is a real possibility. Of course, that takes a valuable roster spot. There's no way around it. So where will the 49ers grab that roster spot? Well, in my other video posted earlier today, make sure to see it after this if you haven't yet. They are only taking 2 quarterbacks. They're taking 6 receivers instead of 7. There's going to be a pinch at the quarterback and the receiver position, in my opinion. There's going to be a pinch along the offensive line if the 49ers only take 8. That's how you buy room for a veteran corner. And I know it's going to make some people want to puke that Dante Johnson might be part of this mix, but just a prediction, and it could be wrong. But just consider it a possibility, and I'm sure the 49ers are discussing it right now as they're making their final decisions, because you're just not really sure what you have out of Thomas and Lenoir when the lights come on in the regular season. It's going to be fascinating, that's for sure. The one thing about Lenoir that makes him more ready to play right away is that we've seen him play with the ones at nickelback. And we know that K'Wan Williams, who also now is 30 years old, has had injury issues in the past. So if K'Wan goes down, who goes in at nickel? maybe Lenore, but maybe you put Dante Johnson in there. Maybe Dante Johnson is the first depth at both cornerback 2 and nickelback, because that's who they put in at nickel last season when they needed it in place of K'Wan Williams. It's about the willingness to go with a rookie who's unproven in the regular season, which is a totally different beast in the preseason, versus, that rookie might have the higher ceiling, versus going with the higher floor. And I know that Dante Johnson is a guy that the 49ers trust to give them some kind of floor these days, whether the fans like it or not. That's just the way that the 49ers are thinking about this. The front line looks really solid, guys, especially after Jaquiski Tartt played a good game and held up against the Raiders. You got Verret, you have Mosley, you have K'Wan. Those are all good players, especially Mosley making the stride. You have Tartt, great communicator. 49ers happy to get him back on the back end there. And you have, of course, Jimmy Ward, extremely versatile player. At safety, it gets really interesting because of the rookie Talanoa Hufanga. John Lynch the other day said that Talanoa Hufanga was on track to potentially start. That's awesome. I mean, that just shows you that Hufanga is a guy that the 49ers scouted correctly. This is a 5th-round draft pick. Ran a 4.6 at his pro day, but if you talk to Jimmy Ward, he plays with 4.3 speed. That means that his instincts are great, and that means that whoever the 49ers scouts are, personnel executives that identified Talanoa Hufanga are doing a good job. And it's just another line of success in the 5th round for the 49ers, where you see testaments to the work of the personnel department. It's not hard to pick a good first rounder, right? Everybody knows that these first round picks, these guys are on film a lot. They're household names. Teams know about these guys. But in the 5th round, you get into the more obscure names. And the fact that the 49ers have had so much success in the 5th round, from George Kittle to Dre Greenlaw to you name it, every single year it seems that the 49ers steal somebody in that round. Well, it looks like Talanoa Hufanga may be next on the list. The fact that he's even in contention to start in a fairly deep 49ers safety room, to me, is impressive. I don't think he will, because it looks like Jaquiski Tartt's going to be healthy, and Jaquiski Tartt does such a good job keeping the secondary aligned. It's like the Fred Warner of the secondary. Silent communicator, but he is a communicator, and it's no coincidence that defense, that pass defense, did look a whole lot worse without Tartt than with him over the past couple of years. In fact, I was talking about Marcel Harris a little bit earlier. The only reason he was roasted so many times in that game against New Orleans in 2019 is because Tartt was out. So Tartt's that frontline spot for sure, but Hufanga's knocking on that door, and Hufanga's going to contribute on special teams. Extremely exciting player. This is now where the roster question comes in. Because Hufanga has impressed you so mightily, and because Tartt is now back a little bit sooner than some people expected, but I think when Tartt expected, I think he's right on track. Because you have that, what do you do with Tavon Wilson, a veteran safety who did a fine job this training camp filling in for Tartt in that first-team role before Talanoa Hufanga was ready to compete for that first-team role? Wilson was solid, and when we talk about high floors, maintaining that high floor to make sure that the bottom doesn't fall out of the defense, there's a lot of value in keeping Tavon Wilson on the roster, especially since the 49ers' first 2 games are played on artificial turf, and Jaquiski Tartt with a turf toe is slated to start on them. And especially because, aside from Tartt's injury history, the other 49ers safety, Jimmy Ward, has a fairly prolific injury history. When you have those two truths, combined with the fact that, those first 2 games are on artificial turf, and your only other safety depth is a rookie, as impressive as he's been, Talanoa Hufanga is still a rookie. When you combine all those data points, I think it's smart for the 49ers to keep a 4th safety. In the past, they've taken only 3. There have been 2019, the Super Bowl year, they took only 3. I think this time it's going to be smart to take 4. And I think that Tavon Wilson is going to find his way onto this football team for the durability purposes that the 49ers need. Again, this is about the floor. This is about raising the floor, and I think Wilson helps you do that. And there's a whole lot of risk in this secondary with Tartt and even with Ward along the front line. Remember, everybody was talking about Ward as being the most injury-prone guy of all time. That was entering 2019. Well, he's delivered 2 healthy seasons. The narrative has changed, but the history hasn't. So I think the 49ers will take 4 safeties. This is where we get to our title man, Ha Clinton-Dix. Everybody's probably wondering, well, you're talking about Tavon Wilson. What about Ha Clinton-Dix? Well, the 49ers signed him later in this training camp. He has a couple picks. I mean, he had the pick against the Raiders that sent Greg Papa into tizzy there. He was laughing about that during the return. I can't even replicate that right now, but that was awesome. That was fun to watch. Tim Ryan had fun with that call. Clinton-Dix, of course, former Pro Bowler. He's a big name if you want to compare it, relative to other street signings later in training camp. But I do think that given where he's at right now, much fewer first team action, with Tavon Wilson, he was working with the ones throughout most of training camp. Then Jaquiski Tartt came back. Ha Clinton-Dix was mainly working with the twos. He feasted on some high Trey Lance throws. He feasted on another high throw against the Raiders. He has a knack for the football. He's a veteran. He knows what he's doing out there. And I think the 49ers are comfortable with him. But I don't know if they're as comfortable with him as far as a high floor guy as they are with a Tavon Wilson. So I think Ha Clinton-Dix is obviously somebody that the 49ers look for as a potential practice squad re-signee. But I just don't see it ahead of Tavon Wilson. And, I think I have highlighted in green. So that means that I see Ha Clinton-Dix's stock rising, and that's great. It actually should be rising. I just don't know if he's been around the team long enough, around the system long enough to make the staff trust him over a Tavon Wilson. Jared Maiden, big pick against the Chargers. Flexibility. He might be able to give you corner and nickelback availability. So, I think he might be a good practice squad guy, but I just don't see any way that you can put, as far as trust in a safety goes, I don't see any way you can put Jared Maiden above Tartt, Ward, Hufanga, or Wilson, and the max you can take at the position is 4. We might see Tarvarius Moore come back before the end of the season. So the 49ers are still holding out with him. We'll see what kind of injury list they put him on. I think it's the pup right now for him, so we'll see how they manage that with Tarvarius Moore. But if he doesn't, he can go on IR once that season starts if he comes on that 53-man roster, which I don't think the 49ers will do. Because I still think that he's got probably 9 or 10. It's an Achilles for Tarvarius Moore. So I think he's a pup player that the 49ers can open up a return window in the midst of the season with, and they don't have to waste a roster spot or do any IR stuff that closes all their options. They'll want to keep their options open with Tarvarius. And that's exciting for the 49ers if his recovery does come along quicker because, again, it's what I talked about at other positions. You may not have room for the guy per se now, but attrition is going to happen, and you're more than happy to get that reinforcement coming in later in the season. I mean, that was a big thing that we talked about in that defensive line room. So that's the 49ers defense. That's who I see them taking. Make sure to check out our 53-man depth chart projection on The Athletic. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I'm going to talk to you guys much more often coming up. So everybody be along here for the ride. It's going to be a fun one. Have a great rest of your Monday.